everyone, I'm François Picard. The anchor palpable in Minneapolis this Thursday. Protesters turning up before dawn after the point-blank shooting death of a motorist. In a dispute with an ICE agent. Donald Trump's head of Homeland Security branded 37-year-old Renee Good a domestic terrorist. Video, though, appeared to dispute Kirsty Noem's claim that the shooting was self-defense. Catherine Viette has more.
This video shows the moment an ICE officer shoots and kills 37-year-old Renee in her car. The footage has shocked and outraged Minneapolis and prompted more protests against the Trump administration's ongoing immigration crackdown. But this is not the first fatal shooting by ICE agents. In the past 4 months alone, at least 9 people in 5 states and the nation's capital have been fired at by agents from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. In September, ICE officers pulled over a man in Chicago. Less than a minute later, Silverio Villegas Gonzalez, a Mexican immigrant, was shot and killed. Homeland Security officials say the agents acted in self-defense, the same justification they gave for the deadly Minneapolis shooting. Immigration experts say to expect more violent encounters between ICE agents and the public.
It's going to get worse because there's more funding coming down the line for them to quickly hire more agents. A lot of people have been warning that this was meant to happen. So unless there's direction from the White House to change tactics, things are going to continue like this for a while.
Since last January, the Trump administration has been deploying ICE agents across the country in a fast-moving blitz that has targeted cities such as Los Angeles, Portland, Chicago, and New Orleans. But the department policy is clear. ICE agents are only authorized to use deadly force if the officer has a reasonable belief that the subject of such force poses an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, and that officers should avoid intentionally placing themselves in such situations.
And we have the head of Homeland Security who's speaking at a press conference in New York City. Let's get the latest now on the situation in the U.S. With our correspondent Fraser Jackson, who joins us from Washington. Fraser, tell us more about this day after and these contradictory claims over exactly what happened.
Yeah, well, the rhetoric has already been extremely high in the immediate aftermath of the shooting. Kirsty Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, called this woman, the 37-year-old U.S. citizen Renee Good, a mother of 3, called her a domestic terrorist, saying she was engaging in domestic terrorism. She's also been labelled a deranged leftist by the Vice President's J.D. Vance, who will be talking to the media at a press conference at 1 p.m. local time here, but we're also in the aftermath learning more about the investigation that's going on into that killing just 24 hours ago. Now, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension was investigating this killing alongside the FBI, but that local investigating unit was later told by the FBI that the U.S. Attorney's Office had changed its mind and reversed course, and that the FBI would no longer be sharing evidence, interviews, or case materials with the local investigators. So the FBI effectively freezing out local investigators from this ongoing investigation. Now, the BCA Force Investigations Unit, which was the team that was overseeing this, was created in 2020 by Minnesota legislature to provide an independent, consistent and trusted mechanism for investigating use of force incidents involving law enforcement officers. That's from their website. And it's likely the government here is going to argue that the involvement of a federal agent from ICE places the case under federal jurisdiction, and that is why they will be the ones to investigate it solely. But we have heard from Minnesota's Attorney General, who was just on CNN recently, who said that he was horrified by the FBI's decision to bring it under a federal purview, and that he would be trying to get the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office to reverse course on that. He also, though, interestingly said that he'd seen evidence that warrants further investigation and maybe even sufficient evidence to hand over over to prosecutors. Now, he said some of the material that has convinced him of that hasn't yet been made public. So this investigation still, of course, very much in the early stages, but now being placed under the purview of the FBI.
Fraser, of course, the reactions where you are in Washington. Let's listen to the U.S. House of Representatives Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries.
We support the removal of violent felons from this country who are here illegally. But that's not what this administration has been doing under the so-called leadership of Kristi Noem, who's a stone-cold liar. There's no evidence at all that this was a justified shooting.
Fraser, you said to us that the reaction is partisan, according to which side of the aisle you're on. How is this going to play out in Congress in the weeks ahead?
Well, remember that the government shutdown possibilities are high at the moment because that the spending bill that ultimately got agreed to at the end of the last government shutdown and ended that shutdown, the longest in history, that expires at the end of January. So Democrats here are once again given the opportunity to potentially have to shut down the government if they want to voice their displeasure or get some kind of legislative gains. Now, the chief thing amongst that really is the fact that the margin in the House now is razor thin. Republicans, because of Marjorie Taylor Greene stepping down and one of the Republican lawmakers in California passing away a few days ago, Republicans now have 218 seats in the House, which is the number needed for majority. So just a couple of defections could really stymie the Republican reconciliation bills. So the Democrats do have some leverage here coming up in the next couple of weeks. Whether they use it now with especially the aftermath of the shooting to voice their displeasure is what we're waiting to see.
Fraser Jackson, our correspondent in Washington, many thanks for that live update. Joining us on set, he is an attorney himself, Bernard Harcourt, professor of law and political theory at Columbia University. Thanks for being with us here on France 24.
Thank you.
First off, your reaction to this news. First of all, is it normal that federal officials will Bigfoot the state when it comes to an investigation like the one that's now in its early days?
No, I mean, usually they would work together, right? Because I mean, this would be a homicide investigation. The question is whether it was justifiable homicide or not. And usually, the local authorities and the federal authorities would work together. There would be a crime scene, and they would investigate. And I mean, usually this is something that's would be taken care of by the state and local authorities. Right?
Even though this is a federal agent that.
Well, right. I mean, it's a federal agent, but it's a pretty regular, homicide.
So how far will that state attorney general in Minnesota go?
Well, I mean, it depends how far they want to take it. It's clear that if I were state attorney general, I would say this is my bailiwick. There was a shooting in Minnesota. That's what I investigate all the time, right? So I mean, I would be pushing hard to be part of the investigation, have the crime scene, interrogations.
That attorney general saying that there's further evidence that's not been revealed to the public already. We have at least 2 different camera angles on what happened.
Right. There are multiple camera angles at this point, and a lot of people who were filming at the time. So, the New York Times has already put together a pretty forensic video compilage of the different videos that were taken that shows pretty well what happened.
And so the Director of Homeland Security's claimed that this was self-defense?
From the forensic video putting together that the New York Times has done and that I've been able to see, this does not look like self-defense, no.
Doesn't look like?
The car, I mean, the car was, the driver, Ms. Good, was told she had to leave. She was backing up slowly, and then she had turned her wheels to go down the street. The person who fired was on the side of the car, basically. It was on the side, on the right, on the left side there.
And the anger is at ICE. These hooded, masked officers who are federal officers. There is no national police force in the United States, and this is as close as it's come. Their remit is to apprehend and deport illegal immigrants. Kienke Oyetade has more on that.
At times, they are easy to spot, dressed in military-style camouflage. Other times, ICE agents move through the streets in masks and plain clothes. Their mission, to locate and remove undocumented immigrants from the United States. Immigration and Customs Enforcement was created after the September 11th attacks to strengthen national security, beginning operations in 2003. Today, it has field offices across the country, including major cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Houston. The agency has around 6,500 deportation officers, but is aggressively looking to expand. Fueled by legislation passed last summer, providing $76.5 billion, nearly $30 billion of which is earmarked for new staff to speed up deportations under President Donald Trump's mass deportation agenda. New recruits undergo intensive training for 6 days a week for 13 weeks, covering immigration law, enforcement tactics, firearms, physical fitness, and arrest procedures. But the push to hire quickly has raised concerns about training standards for new recruits. Critics warn ICE may be too heavy-handed in its arrests, while NBC News reports that some recruits enter training before completing vetting, later failing drug tests, or not meeting physical or academic requirements. ICE maintains its officers are often the ones under attack.
Bernard Harcourt, this is something new for the United States, this entity, ICE?
It is. It's a relatively new entity, which was formed a few years ago within the Department of Homeland Security. One thing that's remarkable about it is its size. It has now become the largest law enforcement agency that the United States has ever had in its history. And so, just over the past year, as a result of the big, beautiful bill, it's basically become the biggest policing force in terms of its funding and the billions that are going into it, and including for construction of detention centers, ICE detention centers. And so it's pretty novel. And relatively, it feels as if it's also not very well regulated. The behavior of ICE officers is, in a sense, often a bit rogue compared to other law enforcement agencies.
What's with the covering faces? Because the United States is the country where, the police officers wear their last name on their tags.
Right. That's part of the.
Why is that? What's the justification for it?
Well, the justification is to prevent being doxxed and harassed. So, in other words, ICE agents are doing this to protect their identity, so that people don't then harass them at their home or expose their families to harassment and whatnot. However, it goes against every American policing instinct or instinct of civil liberties and policing, which is that indeed you show your name, you show your badge, you show your number, right, and you are transparently a policing officer. So that is something that is almost unique to ICE agents. We haven't seen it in the United States in other contexts. You couldn't do that as a New York Police Department officer, or, other agencies. You wouldn't be able to do it, and it ties to the fact that the agency and the agents themselves seem to be operating in a looser environment where they are allowed to be, covering themselves in masks. Of course, a lot of the time they're in plain clothes, so you don't even know that they are ICE agents. They're undercover cars. So a lot of times when people are being detained or captured by them, they're not even sure whether they're being, kidnapped by some gang or something, or actually being arrested by a legitimate law
enforcement
authority.
They don't show a warrant. They don't show.
Yeah. So, you know, also
They don't show identification.
no. Usually, they're not flashing their badge the way that we kind of get used to on, you know, TV series where you see the police officer kind of take out their badge and show their badge. They just kind of, they'll say, you know, we're ICE, and they'll whisk people away. The other thing about it is that, I mean, in my experience, so I represented someone back in February who was deported. And in every experience I had with ICE for that deportation, they were lying, basically. They lied to my client to get the client to come into the ICE office. They lied to me I was the lawyer. I was an attorney. They lied.
How did they lie?
Well, basically, I mean, I was with my client, Nascimento Blair, who was from Jamaica and would be deported back to Jamaica, is now in Jamaica. And there were 3 ICE officers in a room where he was getting arrested, and I was arguing with them that there wasn't a reason for his arrest and that I needed to speak with a superior, a manager in the ICE field office. This was in 26 Federal Plaza down in New York. And, you know, they basically said, well, you've got to sign a certain federal form to prove, to ascertain that you are his attorney, right? And they said, just get the form from the guy over there, and fill that out, and then you can talk to a manager. You can, you know, and we'll let you whatever. And I moved to get that form, and literally they whisked away the client, slammed the door shut, arrested the client, deported him. Right? I mean, so, and also, I mean, the way that they had gotten my client to come into the office, it was like, well, we need to come in, so we need to talk about your status and what. They were going to arrest him. It was clear they were going to arrest him. So they brought him in a pretext. And so there's a way in which those aren't the ways that regular.
So this wasn't an
federal
arrest summons.
agency-
He was brought in.
He walked in himself.
He walked
right?
in,
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. He thought it was going to be you know, an interview, a conversation, et cetera. But that's not the way that federal agencies will operate typically.
You wrote a book a decade ago at the time about how, you know, all those years of the U.S. Being engaged in foreign conflicts meant that there was all this surplus military equipment, and so the police had all this heavy equipment.
Right.
Is ICE sort of the next step, the logical conclusion of all those years of forever wars, as they call them?
Yes, yeah. Well, the book was called The Counter-Revolution, and I think that what's happening right now is a perfect illustration of the way in which kind of counterinsurgency warfare practices are coming back into the United States and being used, you know, in a civilian, in a domestic context. I mean, when you hear, for instance, Kristi Noem calling Ms. Renee Good, who was shot in Minnesota, a domestic terrorist, right? That is a classic counterinsurgency move. It's to turn people into internal enemies, right? Really, internal enemies who you have to eliminate, kill, shoot, detain, you know, and that was the logic of counterinsurgency theory, which we deployed, of course, in Iraq and in Afghanistan. But it's that logic, as well as you say, as the equipment that came back into police departments and police forces, that has come home to roost in a way. And I think what we're seeing here is an example of that.
Bernard Harcourt, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on France 24.
Thank you.